also discussed that why when we want to use, for example, PST1 for cloning a gene at PST1 site, how can we screen that? Right? So Arshi, you remember? And we also discussed alpha complementation. So do you want me to go over again or should we move further?
Ma'am, I'm clear about it. Should I explain it to them also?
In 5 minutes maybe.
Okay. So basically, for understanding alpha complementation, we need to understand the function of LAGZ. So LAGZ is a gene which encodes for beta galactosidase, and this enzyme beta galactosidase, it utilizes XGAL, and when it utilizes XGAL, it makes the colony blue in color, as it can be seen here. So XGAL is utilized by beta galactosidase, and a compound which is indigo or bright blue in color is produced. Now, what happens is the alpha beta galactosidase is a tetramer, and it has four monomers, right? So now each of these monomeric units has two subunits in them, one alpha subunit and one omega subunit. The alpha subunit is encoded by the N terminus and the omega subunit is encoded by the C terminus. This enzyme is encoded by LAGZ, that is beta galactosidase enzyme is encoded by LAGZ, which is present in the E. coli chromosome. Now the N terminus of LAGZ is removed from the chromosome, then the LAGZ won't be functional, right? Because it would require like both the subunits in order to be functional. So basically E. coli DH5 alpha is a strain in which the alpha fragment is deleted from the chromosome. So when you delete this fragment, the LAGZ would not function, and if LAGZ won't function, then it won't consume XGAL, and we would not obtain the indigo color that we were obtaining previously. So what is done is basically this DH5 E. coli DH5 alpha strain lacks functional LAGZ because of the deletion of alpha subunit itself. Now in the PUC19 plasmid, we encode the alpha subunit. So when the plasmid and the E. coli genomic DNA come together, that is, we perform restriction digestion and these come together, then what would happen is we would get three possibilities. First is we get the PUC19 itself. The second one is we get the genomic, as in the genomic integration itself, and the third possibility is both of them combine. So when both of them combine, what we would notice is that the LAGZ would be operational again, and the indigo color would be obtained in the colonies. Was it clear? Um,
So Ashi, just one thing. So when
yes,
both
ma'am.
of them, hello, Ashi.
Yes, ma'am.
So just one point that when Laxi, so for example, if you are using EcoR1, SMA1, BAMH1 or any of these sites for gene cloning, so if the insert is cloned, then the Laxi will get disrupted. And when it will get disrupted, then again it will not make functional Laxi. So even though PUC19 will be there in the strain, but because of the cloning, it will not make the functional alpha fragment, right?
Okay, ma'am. Right, ma'am.
Yes. So therefore this colony, right, this was the last part that I was telling you yesterday. So this colony, which is actually uh, where the laxi of PUC19 is disrupted, right, where the alpha fragment of laxi in PUC19 is disrupted because of the cloning of the desired gene or genomic DNA fragment at EcoR1 or any of the multiple cloning sites. So such colonies will not turn XCal into blue colored product, right? Because the laxi alpha subunit is disrupted, and because it is disrupted it cannot make a functional alpha fragment, and because it cannot make a functional alpha fragment it will not make a functional beta galactosidase, and because it cannot make a functional beta galactosidase it cannot turn XCal into a blue colored compound, right? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So therefore, in such cases, what we will end up getting is blue-white colonies. So this is also called in general blue-white screening or blue-white colonies. So in these cases, the white colonies are the ones which are the desired ones because they contain your insert, and the blue colonies are the ones which do not contain any insert, because in these cases the blue colonies are the ones in which PUC19 is making the alpha subunit, which is complementing the omega subunit coming from the E. coli chromosome, and it is turning the colony into blue color. So this whole method is called as blue-white screening, and you will be doing this in your labs as well. So hope this is clear to everyone. Alpha complementation and blue-white screening.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. So then, this whole method of blue-white screening is used a lot in what is called as genomic DNA library. So people these days, when for example you want to identify a gene, we discussed that you can do southern blotting. You remember that? You can do southern blotting to identify unknown genes. Blotting and hybridization. Likewise, another method which utilizes this PUC19 plasmid is genomic DNA library definition. So in this case, the way that is commonly used for preparation of libraries is PUC19 only, and the reason it is used is because in such cases alpha complementation is possible and blue-white screening is possible. So you can clone large number of inserts, and because of this blue-white screening there is no problem in picking up the colonies which do contain insert. There is no replica plating required. Like if you remember in case of PBR322, there was a replica plating step required. That means you, for example, let me show you here. So for example, in case of PBR322, if we are cloning at PST1, then you transform it and screen on tetracycline plates, but then you will have to replica plate and streak the colonies on ampicillin plates, right? And the colonies where you do not see growth on ampicillin are the ones which are containing the insert, because at PST1 the DNA, the foreign DNA fragment is cloned, and as a result of this the ampicillin resistance gene marker is disrupted, and due to this disruption ampicillin won't function. So this requires a step of replica plating. Likewise, you can even clone at BAMH1 site, but again you transform it and select on ampicillin plates, but then replica plate on tetracycline plates. So this is a two-step process. Point number one. Point number two, if you compare the sizes, PUC19 is 2.6 kb whereas PBR322 is 4.3 kb. So it is comparatively larger than PUC19. So the advantage of smaller plasmids is that smaller plasmids can hold larger inserts. If the plasmid itself is large enough to start with, then the size of inserts that can be cloned are going to be smaller, comparatively smaller, right? The third reason of selecting PUC19 as a cloning vector for genomic DNA library preparations is the copy number. So if you remember, we discussed in the class that PUC18 or PUC19 is a high copy number plasmid. So it can exist in something like 500 copies or 400 copies per cell. On the other hand, when we talk about PBR322, it is a medium copy number plasmid. So when we use a cloning vector which is small in size, which is high in copy number, and which has alpha complementation, then what is advantageous is that you can actually uh, create a large library because of this blue-white screening. All you need to do is after transformation, which I will be explaining you hopefully in today's class, that once you spread once the DNA is taken up, which is called transformation. So once the DNA is taken up by the cells, and once you spread them on antibiotic plates containing X-cal also as substrate, so in such cases the white colonies are the ones which contain insert, and the blue colonies are the ones where the vector has self-ligated. So you can easily pick up these white colonies and then prepare a large library. So what is genomic DNA library? So as the name itself says, genomic DNA library means it's a library of total genomic DNA. So here the size of the library would depend upon the size of the chromosome, right? And the number of the fragment size also varies. That means the fragment of genomic DNA that you will clone in PUC19 can vary, because PUC19 is 2.6 kb. PUC19 is stable and it can hold inserts approximately of the size of 7 kb, so that the final size of the plasmid should not exceed 10 kb. So fragment size can vary. You can prepare a library containing 1 to 3 kb of insert, or you can prepare a library containing, for example, 3 kb to 7 kb of inserts. And these inserts can be prepared by restriction digestion of genomic DNA. All you need to check is the compatibility of the plasmids. So for example, PUC19 can be digested with BAMH1, and the genomic DNA can be digested with SOUT3A1. So SOUT3A1 and BAMH1 generates compatible ends, and therefore they can be easily cloned. The only thing is a 4-base pair cutter. So you perform partial digestion. Other choices are you can even clone, for example, PUC19 digested with BAMH1 and genomic DNA digested with BGL2. BGL2 is a 6-base pair cutter. So again, it depends upon the fragment size which you are interested in cloning. So SOUT3A1 is preferably used because, for example, if the insert size is less than 1 kb or 1 to 3 kb, then you better go for a 4-base pair cutter and perform partial digestion and gel elute. Run it on a gel after partial digestion and gel elute the fragments in the desired range, right? And once you have this gel eluted fragment, you can perform ligation with the help of T4DNA ligase, and then you do allow this DNA, you do the transformation, which I will be telling you in today's class how to do it. And then once you do the transformation, then you can simply do what is called as blue white screening. And this way you can prepare really a large library and in just one step, right? The size of the library that is usually selected is class. It is usually, for example, some people say 4 times the size of the plasmid. So for example, if the 4 times the size of the chromosome. So for example, if the chromosome is 4.6 megabase pairs, and if you are imagining fragments of 1 to 3 kb, then you can imagine how many colonies you need to screen to prepare a large library, which should be a representative library for the entire chromosome. So I guess you're going to learn this in detail in recombinant DNA technology course, and maybe also in the genomics course. So hopefully this application part is clear to you. Are you people there or left?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So then, so coming back to again these cloning vectors, so we discussed that you can clone at PSD1, we discussed that you can clone at BAMH1, we discussed that you can clone in case of PUC19 anywhere between BAMH1 or PSD1 or any of these sites, right? Now, the problem with this kind of cloning is class, let me tell you the problem. So the problem, so this is very good because you can do blue-white screening. Alpha complementation is possible in case of PUC19, right? And in case of PBR322, you can select on based upon antibiotic sensitivity, right? In case, okay, now the problem is directionality. we are trying to clone, for example, class, so when we are trying to clone the, let me go back to this figure one more time. So the directionality of the insert is not maintained, class, when we are using single enzyme. So let's say this is digested with EcoR1, cut with EcoR1. Genomic DNA is also cut with EcoR1. You mix and ligate, you get three kinds of populations. One where genomic DNA has self-ligated. That means the EcoR1 digested fragments have ligated by themselves. Possibility 2, that PBr322 digested with EcoR1 will again join back, which is shown in D. And possibility 3, where EcoR1 has ligated with EcoR1 digested genomic DNA fragment, which is shown in C. And it is C which is the desired one. Now, the point that I am trying to tell you is that when we digest it with EcoR1, when the vector is digested with EcoR1, the insert is digested with EcoR1, then the directionality of the insert is not maintained. It can be it can be inserted either in this direction or in the opposite direction. So in such cases, class, when for example directionality becomes important, are you getting this point or no? Are you able to imagine? Are you able to think what is happening? Yes or no? You need to speak up, otherwise I will keep continuing and then I
What
would
do you
assume.
mean by directionality here?
Right. So what I mean by directionality is that if you remember that in the PCR product we had GAA, TTC, and let's say we added a few bases like GCA like this, and then GAA, TTC, and then followed by ATG, and then CAC, something like this, and this goes on, and then again you have some sequence, for example CCC, GAG, TC, AG, like this, and ultimately the stop codon TAA, TGA, right? Any of these stop codons. So and then again you have put the site of EcoR1 and then again some bases, for example CTA. So this is the point I'm trying to make, that you have EcoR1 in both the sides. So this part can be ligated in this orientation or it can be ligated in the opposite orientation. Is it clear or no?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Because both the sides, at both the ends you have EcoR1. So either you can have directionality maintained in the way like this. Uh, or you can have in the opposite orientation like this, or you can have right. So this is the point. So whenever we are using single enzyme, for example, and doesn't matter whether it's a cohesive end or whether it's a blunt end, directionality cannot be maintained because the ends are same. EcoR1 can join with EcoR1, right? So therefore you have both in the forward primer and in the reverse primer you have EcoR1. So EcoR1 can ligate in either orientation. So therefore once you have performed the cloning, you would not know in which direction we got the clone. So for sequencing, for genomic DNA library preparation, this doesn't matter because you are interested in just getting the clone, just getting the insert cloned in the vector, and because you are interested in preparing a larger library, right? But this becomes important, so please try to listen this part carefully. So this becomes directionality, class becomes important. Directionality becomes important when you are interested in expression of the gene. When you are just interested in cloning of the gene, and this cloning can be for sequencing. So in such cases, directionality is not important because all you are interested in just getting the sequence. Directionality also becomes less or no important of no importance when you are cloning the desired gene along with the regulatory regions. So in such cases, doesn't matter in which direction it is cloned, but because the gene contains its own sequences which are required for its regulation, which are required for its expression, then again directionality is immaterial. But directionality becomes important when you want the desired gene for expression, and particularly when the regulatory genes, right? The regulatory genes provided by the I have made this point clear that when the regulatory genes are provided by the vector, then you need to maintain the directionality. When the regulatory genes are coming together with the insert, then it is immaterial. So what are these regulatory genes? So regulatory genes, or maybe I'll write it regulatory sequences. Let's put it this way. Let's not use the word gene. Gene I will tell you when I'll be teaching you transcription. So regulatory genes are important, but then I will discuss this term of regulatory genes when we'll be discussing regulation of transcription. But for now, regulatory sequences, let's use this word, they are provided by the vector. So these regulatory sequences are usually present before and after the gene. So you have gene, and then you have again the regulatory sequences. So after the gene you have the regulatory sequences, for example the signals for termination of transcription, and before the gene you require the sequences which are responsible for initiation of transcription, right? So these regulatory sequences are for initiation and termination of transcription. So the point I'm trying to tell you is that when these sequences class, so when these sequences, these regulatory sequences which are required for initiation of transcription, are required for termination of transcription, when they are coming from the vector, then this vector is called as an expression vector. In expression vector, the difference between a cloning vector and an expression vector is that cloning vector is simply used for cloning of genes. The examples for cloning vector are, as we discussed, PBR322, PUC19, etc., where you can just clone. In cloning vectors, you don't have to worry the regulatory sequences. You can simply clone the gene from ATG, TAG, or TGA, any of the stop codons. In case of expression vector, you can clone again the same ATG to TAG to TAA, but then for expression it requires the sequences above or below the stop codon. Is it clear? Now, what are these exactly sequences which are required for initiation of transcription, which are required for termination of transcription? I will be discussing this in more detail when I will be teaching you transcription, and at that time we will come back to this term which is called expression vector. Okay. Class, is it clear or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now before one more point over here. So we discussed that you can, for example, clone at EcoR1, you can clone at PST1. In case of PBR322, you can clone at PST1. In that case, you are going to screen for first step on tetracycline plates, second step replica plating, and check for ampicillin sensitivity, right? If you clone it on EcoR1, then in this case directionality is not maintained. Directionality is not maintained in any of the cases, PST1, EcoR1, BAMH1, directionality is not maintained, right? So how can we maintain directionality when we are using PBR322? Based upon what I explained you just now. So let us say if we want to clone a gene in a specific direction. So how can we use PBR322 for cloning and yet maintaining directionality, yet maintaining the orientation? Class, you need to speak up, otherwise you will not be able to imagine the bigger picture. I will keep on lecturing and then you will not follow. So which sites should be used for maintaining the directionality? Let me see who is there in my class. Vishantan has come. Are you okay, Vishantan?
I'm a bit better because like I got both dengue and typhoid.
Okay, okay.
But like now it's a bit better since I took the medicines.
Oh, so Devpriya, Ashi, Ratnesh, how to maintain directionality?
Ma'am, I don't know. Ma'am, I do not know. Like, there was some internet connectivity issue. I couldn't join. I just, I joined. I have joined in 9:20, so I
Okay,
can't say about that.
okay. I'm sorry,
But
I did
they
not
will.
see that.
I don't know what has happened. I apologize for that, ma'am.
Oh, okay, no problems. No, I did not see the Teams when I am teaching you. I have only the PowerPoint icon open. I did not check in Teams. Okay, let me see. Devpriya, are you there or left? Satyakam, are you there or left? Ashi?
Ma'am, maybe we can use the sequences that we're placing at the like before the start codon and after the stop codon.
No, no, no. So see, for ligation, you need to prepare vector and you need to prepare insert. So my question is, for directional cloning, which sites should be used in the vector? Based upon what I have taught. Just try it once and then I'll help you.
Ma'am, will we use two different sites instead of one site because
Yes, very good. You will use two different sites, but then what are these two different sites from this map of PBR322? Which one would you select?
ma'am, maybe one at the beginning and one towards the end.
Okay. And the rationale for that?
Ma'am, so that we get the entire gene inserted, as in between these two sites itself.
Okay, so actually, Ashi, what you said is very correct. You have to use two different enzymes. So usually the way, for example, in case of PBR322, the way you should be selecting enzymes is you should keep one antibiotic cassette intact. So for example, if you are selecting PST1 and EcoR1, then tetracycline is intact because you need one antibiotic cassette for screening the colonies, right, on the plates. Once the bacteria has taken up the colonies, you need to screen the colonies on the antibiotic containing plates. So in such cases, either you need to touch ampicillin or you can touch tetracycline, but not both. So in case of ampicillin, you can select a site, for example, PST1 and EcoR1, for the simple reason that EcoR1 is much away from the tetracycline resistant stearic acid. If you want to select the colonies on ampicillin plates, then you can select any enzyme. You can select EcoR5 and SAL1, you can select EcoR5 and NRU1, any of these sites would work. right? Likewise, in case of PUC 19, how can we do directional cloning? Class, for PUC 19, how can we do directional cloning?
Ma'am, here also we'll go by the similar method, but since we have only one resistance cassette, we'll have to see something in the lag C region.
Right, right. So you are not going to touch ampicillin. So you will have to use some sites in the Laxi, and again you can select sites, for example, two incompatible sites. For example, you can select BAMH1 and Hindi3. You can select KPN1 and PST1. Any of these enzymes would do. And the point is that, so this point you need to understand carefully, everybody, that when you are using KPN1 and SPH1, or when we are using SMA1 and Hindi3, BAMH1 and Hindi3, so in such cases we cannot have self ligation possible, right? Because the ends generated by BAMH1 are not compatible with the ends generated by Hindi3. The ends generated by PST1 are not compatible with the ends generated by BAMH1. So in this case, if you are using two sites, there are two advantages. You can maintain directionality. The number of self-ligated colonies are going to be less or almost no. So the reason I am telling you less is, at times if the digestion is not 100% complete, you can have self-ligation, but then the self-ligated colonies can be removed with the help of blue-white screening, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, so we can use any of these enzymes, and then we can do directional cloning in PUC 19 as well. Okay, now the last point before I move to gene transfer in bacteria. So the last point is, okay, PBR322 and PUC19 are the cloning vectors where you can use different sites for cloning, or you can use single site for cloning, right? But many a times you can have a situation, you can have a plasmid where you cannot, I mean, for example, in case of PBR322, or you imagine a vector where you have just one antibiotic cassette like this one, only ampicillin, so you cannot use any restriction site which is cutting the ampicillin resistance gene cassette, right? And if LAGZ is also not there, right? So you imagine a vector where LAGZ is also not there and just one antibiotic is there. So then how to do the cloning in such cases, right? So LAGC and antibiotic resistance gene cassettes are good for screening, because you can select on antibiotic plates and look for antibiotic sensitivity. In case of LAGC, you can do blue-white screening, but then often you can have a situation where you will have to clone at just one site and you do not have the option of selecting two sites. So for example, you do not have this option of selecting, let's say, eco R1 and SMA1. Let's say this option is not available and you have to clone it between eco R1. You do not have this option of screening by blue-white colonies or by antibiotic sensitivity. So in such cases, class, what is used is what is called as alkaline phosphatase. So I will just introduce you about this enzyme, but the other enzymes you will learn in 733. So alkaline phosphatase, the term alkaline phosphatase itself says that phosphatase, that means it can remove phosphate. CIAP is alkaline phosphatase, which is obtained from calf intestine. So this enzyme is called as calf intestinal alkaline phosphatase. Okay, calf intestinal alkaline phosphatase. alkaline phosphatase. So what happens is that if you have a vector class, so when we digest it with eco-R1, the phosphodiester bond is broken up, and therefore you almost always have one end has hydroxyl group and one end has phosphate group. So when we add the T4-DNA ligase, phosphodiester bond is formed and ligation takes place. But what happens is when we treat the vector which is digested with eco-R1, so let me write it like this. So what you do is, for example, the vector is digested with eco-R1, for example, but it can be any other enzyme, SMA1, BAMH1, HindE3, NT1, any of these, right? So the vector is digested with eco-R1, and what you do is now treat it with alkaline. So what it does is that it will remove the phosphate groups. Once it removes the phosphate groups, you have hydroxyl groups at both the ends, at 5' end and at 3' end. So therefore because you do not have phosphate group, phosphodiester bond cannot be formed between the two ends of the vector, and therefore vector cannot be self-ligated. People following?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Self-ligate.
ma'am.
Explain the last point again, how did you remove the phosphates?
So the way we removed phosphate was with the help of an enzyme called phosphatase, and the enzyme, so there are two enzymes in fact which are commercially available. One is from calf intestine, so that is why it is called calf intestinal alkaline phosphatase, and the other is obtained from a bacteria which was isolated from Antarctic. So therefore this is called as Antarctic phosphatase, but the one which is commonly used is from the calf intestine. Okay, Satyakam.
Okay.
So once we treat it with phosphatase, then the phosphates would be removed, and once the phosphate would be removed, you will have on both the ends you have only hydroxyl group, and because you have only hydroxyl group at both the ends, phosphodiester bond cannot be formed even in the presence of T4-DNA ligase, even in the presence of ATP. You cannot have formation of phosphodiester bond, and therefore self-ligation will not work. Now what will happen is, in such a case, in such a vector, when we now bring the insert which is digested with eco-R1, so the insert will have the phosphate group at least in one of the ends. So what will happen is, at least one strand will get ligated, as you can see in the figure, because of the formation of phosphodiester bond, which is coming from the phosphate group is coming from the insert, which is either from restriction digested fragment of genomic DNA or PCR product digested with restriction enzymes. So you will have phosphate group. So ultimately phosphodiester bond will be formed in the top strand. On the bottom strand you will not have formation of this phosphodiester bond, but then the cell has this machinery to repair this nick, and ultimately you will have a successful ligation possible. Okay, so in this case, even though we are using eco-R1 site, even in the absence of any screening marker, no no gene, for example LAGC is not there for screening, antibiotic resistance cassette is not there for screening, but still you can try to avoid the self-ligating colonies by simply treating it with alkaline phosphatase and then performing the ligation. So now the question is, why not we do the phosphatase treatment to start with? Why are we doing the screening on antibiotic plates, or why are we doing the screening on LAGC? alpha blue white screening. Why should we straight away go for alkaline phosphatase treatment and then do ligation, and then you will have most of the colonies which contain insert, and then you can prepare the library, you can confirm the clones again. So this is usually not done, because when we treat it with alkaline phosphatase class, there are two problems. So when we treat it with phosphatase, you need to remove this enzyme, which is phosphatase, before performing ligation. So you need to include a step, and during this phenol chloroform purification, the chances of loss of, I mean, you will it will end up resulting in reduced yield of the plasmid, because phenol chloroform would involve a number of centrifugation steps, and then you will have to collect the supernatant with the help of a pipette. So there is a loss, and therefore this is not the preferred step. Also, often if it is, even if it is present in traces, it can inhibit the ligation. So therefore this is usually avoided. But at times when there is no option of blue white screening or antibiotic sensitivity or green fluorescence protein, then we do use alkaline phosphatase to prevent self ligation of the vector and to get the colonies which contain your desired insert. Okay, so hope it is clear to everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so then the next part is, once you have learned what are cloning vectors, what are expression vectors, so then the point is, can we make these vectors by ourselves? Can we do these gene cloning? So the answer is yes, you can prepare your own vectors, you can clone inserts of your choice. But for that you need to perform what is called as plasmid isolation, right? So plasmid isolation is actually done, you will be doing this in the lab as well. So for plasmid isolation, the protocol is that you start with a single colony, right? You start with a single colony and then you inoculate it LP medium. It is good to start with a single colony and not a loop full of colonies, because when you are starting with single colony, you are absolutely sure that the purity is maintained. So you inoculate it in LB medium and then allow the culture, allow the cells to grow 16 hours, right? Centrifuge cells, and this step you can perform at 12 or 13,000 rpm. LB medium and cell pellet, right? Pellet is actually washed, so wash the pellet with, use milicu as well. You can use solution 1. What is there in solution 1? I'll be telling you in a minute. So you are going to wash the pellet with solution 1, and this washing is very important because it has been shown that any traces of media are going to be inhibitory in the next steps. You should not have any traces of media, so this is to avoid any traces. Now for this washing, so in molecular biology, whenever we use the term washing means you add the molecule water or add the solution 1, vortex it and ensure that every cell is washed. So every cell is now surrounded with a thin film of molecule or solution 1, and then when you centrifuge it at 12,000 rpm, pellet. So this pellet is now ready for plasmid isolation because it doesn't contain any remnants of media. media actually has a lot of salt. So if you see the composition of LP, LP has yeast extract, LP has tryptol, LP has sodium chloride. So it is this sodium chloride which can trouble you a lot. So therefore, it is very important that you should not have any traces of media. Okay. Now in the next step, what you
Ma'am,
use? Yes.
for growing bacteria, we need sodium chloride.
So say it again.
I'm saying for growing bacteria in Luria broth, we need sodium chloride. Like in Luria
Yes,
broth, there is sodium
Luria
chloride.
broth has sodium chloride. Yes.
So bacteria uses sodium chloride for growth.
Yes, so bacteria uses many things. So for example, so this LB is a complex media. So you would have studied this in microbiology that you can have synthetic media or you can have complex media. So in synthetic media, which is called defined media, you can have you can add calcium, you can add sodium, you have to add magnesium, you have to add potassium. All these are required for growth, and then you have to add carbon source, you have to add nitrogen source. Some of the strains also require certain other trace elements like copper, cobalt, zinc. Some of the strains require vitamins, for example biotin, riboflavin, etc. Right, so they all
Yes, ma'am. That we know, but when you are describing like Luria broth contains three things like tryptone and sodium chloride and yeast extract. Means sodium chloride is an important like in more amount,
yes,
I think, like concentration.
concentrations actually maybe
Like
towards
it should be very less concentration of sodium chloride. Like it is not what is called a major element.
no,
I
not
think
a
so.
major, no, not a major thing, huh?
So it should be in very less concentration, no?
Yes, yes. I'll be telling you in a second. If we have only 12 minutes, let me go over the protocol and then we'll come back to the composition.
Okay, ma'am.
Right. So resuspend the pellet in solution 1. So this pellet actually contains a TrisCl, which is there for buffering action. This pellet also contains sucrose or glucose depending upon the requirement. This pellet often contains EDTA, right? So TrisCl, EDTA, sucrose or glucose. So the purpose of TrisCl is it is a buffer. Sucrose and glucose are added to impart to make the solution hypertonic, so it helps in lysis of the cells. And EDTA, it, as we discussed previously for genomic DNA isolation, so EDTA chelates magnesium ions which are actually present in the cell membrane, and once these magnesium ions are removed, the membrane gets destabilized. So I'm not giving you the exact volumes because what is important for now is to understand the concept. The amount of solution 1, solution 2 and solution 3 can vary a lot depending upon the amount of sample that you are using. Okay, so once you resuspend the pellet in solution 1, resuspend the pellet in solution 1. So once you have mixed it, then you add actually solution 2. Now this is very important. Solution 2 actually contains STS, and STS, the class knows that it's an anionic detergent which helps in lysing of the membrane hydroxide. So that is why this whole method of plasmid isolation is called lysis method. This is the main difference between the genomic DNA and the plasmid DNA isolation methods. So when you are isolating genomic DNA, we do not use sodium hydroxide, and when we are using plasmid isolation, when we are doing plasmid isolation, we do use sodium hydroxide. So now what is the purpose of sodium hydroxide? So sodium hydroxide is, as the name, as you know, it has very alkaline pH of around 11. So what happens is that at this alkaline pH, the genomic DNA gets denatured. genomic DNA gets denatured, and genomic DNA is very large in size. So once we have this raised pH, the genomic DNA gets denatured. This lysis is performed maximum for 5 minutes and not more. After this step, you will find that the whole solution will become very viscous, and the reason it becomes viscous is because you have treated with SDS, which lyses the membrane, right? So the membrane is lysed. Sodium hydroxide has denatured the genomic DNA, so the genomic DNA will come out into the solution and it will make the solution viscous. Now what we add is we add another solution which is called as solution 3, and this solution 3 actually contains potassium and this has a pH of 5.2. So when we use potassium acetate with a pH of 5.2 acidic pH, this is called as neutralization solution because the high pH which was raised when we added solution 2 becomes neutralized when we add solution 3, right? After this step you need to incubate your tubes in ice cold mixture for about in fact it can vary from 5 to 15 minutes, and after this step you will find that a white fluffy mass will be observed. This white fluffy mass will actually contain denatured genomic DNA. It will contain cellular debris, contain denatured proteins. This white fluffy mass will be observed, which will contain all of these clumped up or precipitated. Now what you do is that you centrifuge this at 4 degrees Celsius at 12,000 rpm, but this time you do it for 15 minutes. And what we do is we collect the supernatant. So the white pellet will be separated and then you collect the supernatant, and this supernatant is the one which sodium hydroxide. Actually genomic DNA gets denatured. Plasmids are supercoiled, but still they also get denatured, but because of the small size, when we renature them, they actually reanneal very fast. Many a times the supercoiling is so intense that they are not affected by alkali. But even if they are affected, then they can renature because of the small size. On the other hand, genomic DNA will actually form a clump because it will form an aggregate, because as we discussed during Cott curve, so when we do the renaturation, they will anneal not with each other but with different ends, and therefore they will form an aggregate, they will form a clump. So ultimately when we centrifuge it, this whole cellular debris, genomic DNA and denatured proteins will get separated, and you can collect the supernatant which contains the plasmids. Now the plasmid in this supernatant is very dilute. So what we do is you can precipitate by adding, there are two ways. You can add 2 volumes. You can add 0.8 volumes of isopropanol. Once you do this, you will find that after this you are going to centrifuge it again at 12,000 rpm, right? And then what you will find is that the pellet will contain the plasmid. So you will discard the supernatant, centrifuge at 12,000 rpm, discard the supernatant, will contain the plasmid, right? Now if the pellet actually appears clear and transparent, then you know that your plasmid preparation is very pure. But when the pellet appears white, is white in color, then that means there are some salts coming in. So we wash the pellet with 70% phenol, and then again huge and collect the pellet. Now, there are two possibilities. Once you have collected the pellet, so many a times RNA also comes. So there are people use two different methods. Either at this step you dissolve, pellet is dissolved in TE buffer, and TE buffer is tris EDTA buffer. So the DNA is most stable in TE buffer of pH 8. So EDTA, if you remember, we discussed in the class that EDTA chelates magnesium ions, which are cofactors for DNases. So if DNases are not there, the DNA will not be degraded. So pellet is dissolved in TE buffer for long-term storage. Okay. Now, many a times what people do is that if the pellet still looks impure, you can include a step of, I will write it as optional. So many a times people do use phenol chloroform, exactly like the way we had discussed phenol chloroform treatment of the solution. Or the second thing is, many a times when you analyze it on a gel, RNA contamination is there, so you can treat it with the enzyme called RNase. So this RNase step can be performed either towards the end, or many a times in the solution one itself people add RNA over here. In the solution one itself, many a times people use RNAs. So this is actually again user defined. So you will find some protocols where RNase treatment is done in the first step, whereas in others where they isolate the plasmid and then treat it with RNase. Okay, so once you have performed the plasmid isolation, then you can analyze it. Analyze it on which gel class? Which gel should we use for
On
analysis?
ma'am, agaro gel.
Agarose gel, very good. So you can analyze it on an agarose gel. On an agarose gel, and if the DNA is there, and if you see that yes, the plasmid is isolated, then the plasmid is ready to go for further steps, which include restriction digestion, which include for example in cloning. You can perform restriction digestion, and after restriction digestion you can do gel elution. Restriction digestion again followed by agarose gel electrophoresis, right? Then you can do the gel elution of the vector or the desired fragment, right? Likewise, you can prepare the insert, analyze it on an agarose gel after PCR, or perform restriction digestion, analyze it on an agarose gel, gel elute the vector, gel elute the insert, add the T4 DNA ligase and do the gene cloning, right? So when we do the T4 DNA ligase treatment class, ligase treatment, cloning doesn't stop here. So after the ligase treatment, we need to put the DNA in the bacterial cell, which opens up the next topic, which is gene transfer in bacteria. So gene transfer in bacteria class can be done by multiple methods. The first one is transformation, the next one is conjugation, and the third one is trans. We'll start with gene transfer methods from the next class maybe. So if you have any doubts from today's class, please tell me, please ask me. Do you have another class now?
Yes, ma'am, we have class, but
Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't have many doubts.
Okay, but still if you have